you everyone for joining our webinar on the IPA upgrade. Admittedly, this is a relatively easy to go through process, so we're not going to belabor the point, so you'll get out of class a little early today. I try to add some value to it throughout, so I hope that you can see some things that are useful to you. And then there is a IPA differences webinar that we did a while ago. That's available online for download on our education site. So if you want to know the differences between ProcessFlow and IPA, you can always go and download that and watch it online and download the actual presentation deck and the documentation that came with it. But you know, for the benefit of those of you who haven't seen that one, and where it applies, I have included a couple of the slides from that presentation just because I think they're relevant to the upgrade process and helping you understand why certain things are done the way they are and why it behooves you to kind of do the upgrade prior to your major upgrade. I don't actually have a slide for that specific point that I just brought up. So why should you do your IPA upgrade prior to your 10X upgrade per se? So if you're going to upgrade from 901 to 10X, and in fact, before we do that, since there's quite a few people online now, I'm going to do a quick poll here because it'll help me understand which way to lead this. So I want to know what version of Lawson you guys are on. And don't worry, this is actually an anonymized poll. I don't get to see who answered what. I'm just trying to see how we should focus this. So there should be a poll on your screen that you can click on. Looks like, wow, that's something, guys. I'm getting 92% of you are on 901, and that's quite a few votes that have come in. 93%. 2 people are on 10. That's good. Well, the good news is nobody's prior to 901, 900 or 901. So that's good, and everybody seems to care. So we just threw that option in there to make sure everybody was awake. So, okay, good. So this is a very relevant discussion then. So I'll talk about that for a second, and then let's do this other poll because it's also attached to the same thing. So I'm gonna ask you, are you using any landmark products in production? So there's a voting button on your screen right now that you can vote. If you can't see the voting button, you may have to log out and log back in or something. Don't worry, you won't lose your place. Well, unless you take a lot of time doing it. So it looks like 82% of you do not have any let's say 80% don't have any landmark products installed. Okay, that I suspected. So now we're up to 84%, and nearly gotten. Well, we got quite a few people that have replied. Not everybody. Okay, good. So then. What I get is that overwhelmingly we're a 901 and overwhelmingly we don't have landmark products installed. That's good because it makes this next point very relevant. So the reason you want to do this upgrade, and I haven't changed slides, so don't worry that the slide hasn't advanced yet. The reason you want to do this prior to your 10X upgrade, when you do install the 10X application, you are going to need to install a landmark application server, and you are going to have a landmark runtime environment and whatever comes with that. So that actually requires new provisions for processing resources. I hate to call it hardware because a lot of you guys are virtualized now, but you'll have, let's call it that. You'll have new hardware for that, and you'll have to designate, new security on that, and you need to kind of have some provisions in place. And all of that obviously takes time to do, and it takes some planning to do. And then you'll have to upgrade all your other ancillary products with that 10X upgrade as well. So one of those is your ProcessFlow that you'll have to upgrade. Another is that you'll have to be on Lawson Security, not LAUA, so we talked about that last week. Now, that's not really an upgrade, but in my mind, it kind of is. It's really migrating some ideas into another thing. Then the last thing is LDI. So that's something we're covering next week, that you're going to have to upgrade when you upgrade to 10. But the good news is you can upgrade those three things I just named: security, IPA, and LDI, and MSCM for all that, for those of you who might care about that, prior to your actual 10x upgrade. And the reason IPA is a really good candidate for that is not only your flows will basically more or less just migrate over to the 10 version. So there isn't a whole lot of work there that needs to be done, but it sets you up with a landmark runtime environment now, so that you can kind of be one step ahead of the process when it comes to doing your 10x upgrade. Plus, really, that the environment and application upgrade, they're big enough projects already as it is. It's just nice to be able to piecemeal it and get pieces of it out of the way. And as you know, interfaces are always a kind of a big part of these upgrade projects and testing. So it's just good to get as many smaller things out of the way as possible. So with that out of the way, I'll proceed. And another point that I forgot to make that I usually make at the beginning of each one of these, feel free to type in your questions on the chat box on the bottom left, but I'm not going to be able to answer them until the very end during the QA session. So a little history helps to kind of understand what ProcessFlow is or IPA is and where it came from. So the products, we're going to go from left to right here, and there's a little bit of a line missing for whatever reason. The set on the left is actually connected to the set on the right. That's a progression. Okay. So it started out as ProcessFlow, which was a very long time ago, and then it became ProcessFlow Professional, which a lot of you are actually familiar with. And then there was a product called BCI, which was the Business Component Integrator, that really allowed you to kind of start building actual interfaces. So reading from files and being able to transform files and things like that. And with ProcessFlow Integrator, which was kind of one of the more recent versions you're used to, those two products became one. So BCI became part of ProcessFlow Professional, and it became ProcessFlow Integrator. And there's a question on the screen that says, should the screen have refreshed? Still on the title page. Yes, the screen has refreshed. We are on a page called A Little History. And if you can't see that, I recommend you log out and log back in. This is something a few users have seen over all our webinars. So if you can't see A Little History at the title of your screen, your screen is not advancing. So I recommend you log out and log back in. Anyway, so ProcessFlow Integrator, and then that more or less just got renamed to Lawson Process Automation. And what that came with was a little bit of a refresh on the designer tool. And the next iteration is this in-for process automation and process integration. That's just kind of the new product, which is a landmark product. Okay, so that's really the history of the product. So you might hear IPA, you might hear LPA, you might hear PFlow, you might hear ProcessFlow Professional or Integrator. They're really all the same product. So if you're not familiar with it, we're actually, since the question's now there, have you worked with ProcessFlow yourself, or are you using it, or have you worked with it at all? So there's a poll on your screen. I just want to know how much more I should focus on. It seems like everybody knows what it is. Okay. Good. So a good nearly 100% of you have worked with it, except for one person. Okay. So that was a poll that was on your screen. If you didn't see that, I'm not. There's very few people that have issues with the poll usually. Okay, so I'm going to stop the voting on that right now. It looks like nearly 100% of you, well, 97% have worked with the product before. Okay, thank you. So So technology-wise, this new version is loaded with the landmark technology and is associated with landmark technology release. Okay, so again, it is a landmark product. That means there's nothing remnant of its the way it was working on your S3 application server. Okay, it's no longer a WebSphere kind of service or application that runs there. It's now on the landmark application server, and it runs there with the landmark runtime. And then again, the designer must be associated with a specific landmark technology release. Okay, so but that's kind of always been the case. The designer version should match your technology the version of the actual IPA. Okay, is what really all that is saying. And that's really all you need to kind of know from a technology standpoint. There is not a whole lot more, from a connectivity. And these are some of the slides that we had in the previous one. I just thought they were necessary here because you'll see why in a minute. So there's just some more connectivity options. I'm not going to go over each one of these, but on the screen, I think the one that you'll notice is JMS. It's the Java messaging service, but the rest are more or less. And there's obviously the landmark node. Okay, so but the major differences are, again, it's built on landmark technology. There's an Eclipse Designer, which was actually it's not really new. It's the same one you were using with LPA, the Eclipse version. It does have a few more pieces in it that you're very likely not familiar with, and I'm not going to go over those because they're in the differences webinar, so you can go back and review that. They're no longer XML files. So they're LDP files. I forget actually, is it LDP or LPD files? And they're not really stored in like a directory anymore. They're in the database. But again, if you're interested in finding the details out about that, you can go and check that webinar. The NIM tool is now built into the rich client, which is nice. It's a nice thing to have it all kind of in one place rather than on menu.do versus on the configuration settings and scripts and whatnot. So everything is built into the rich client. If you haven't worked with the rich client before, which based on the poll results, a lot of you haven't worked with the rich client. The rich client is basically the tool that you will use to administer a lot of things and to access a lot of the landmark applications. Okay. And it is kind of a Java-looking interface, and I think a lot of people who've used it seem to like it. It has a reduced footprint now, so the event managers merged with LPS. The RMI server is no longer there, which is nice. The scheduler is now part of Landmark, so it's not really a scheduler that's just unique to the process automation. Menu.do is not there. Again, that's also within the rich client. All the functionality of that is there. And the Java clients are all part of the rich client. So like the admin tool and whatever the other tools were. And the designer now works with a single data area at a time, which is also kind of nice. And then flows. Another thing that's nice with the designer is that it now allows you to save your profiles. So you can set different connection profiles, to connect to test, to prod, to development, and you can save those parameters so you don't have to type them in every time, which is a huge time saver for developers. Flows and logs are now stored in the database, and the in-basket is now part of the Smart Office and Rich Client. So again, so this is kind of a view of the architecture. You get the designer and then the administrator in-basket that connects through the process server, sits on top of the Landmark grid, and that obviously operates on top of the Landmark runtime environment. And then, so now to kind of talk about the upgrade itself, again, like I said, this is going to be a short webinar because things are relatively simple for you to do. It's just an advantage of what you need to, take advantage of before you do your big upgrade. So the steps are you need to install the Landmark runtime on a server. So that needs to get done as a part of your next upgrade anyway, so you might as well get it done now with this upgrade. Then you install the Gen product line there, and then you install what the Enforce Security Services, which is a kind of a newer product. It helps the Landmark communicate with your application, with your Lawson application. I'm not going to get to technical details simply because I'll probably just kind of step into something I won't be able to answer. All I know is how to set this up and how to get it to work. I don't really know exactly the details of how the basics of that works. And then you migrate your flows and you test them. And we'll get to that. We'll kind of look into that in a little bit more detail in a second. So this is basically, you know, looking at the Landmark grid. This is where the big arrow is. That's, you know, that's IPA running off the Landmark. So, and you know where you go to stop and start it basically. So it's just so you can believe that it is different. It is not really the same thing anymore. And when you look at our differences webinar, you'll know that it is, you know, you'll see some of the more detailed differences between the two. You'll see a lot more of the screens as well. That we've got quite a few screenshots of the rich client. So we touched on migration real quick. So what does migration mean? So you're going to install all this stuff, but I guess the scary part for all of us is how do I make sure that I move all my flows from where they are now into this unknown kind of cloud of a Landmark environment and then have them just work somehow? Well, luckily, the migration utility is included with IPA. There's a script. So the steps are basically, you know, all the flows that you have are usable exactly as they are. So you run a script and it packages all your jar files, and then it moves your PFI data into Landmark. And then it migrates your flows. So those are your XML files that are sitting in your PF repository directory, and it moves them into LPD format, but onto the actual database. So there's not going to be a PF repository directory anymore where these things sit. They actually just sit in the database. So the data within them now is on the database side, which is actually quite nice because it kind of removes the ambiguity about, oh, what are the files in here, which version and whatnot, and cleaning them up becomes more of a trivial task of just knowing what came last and that sort of thing. And then the non-runtime data is converted into Landmark. Then you're just going to load and test the IPA solution. I mean, you're just going to, you know, you have to basically test every one of your flows to make sure it works still. There are going to be some of them that are going to have some minor issues. And then the other thing is, you know, there's a couple of new functionalities within flows. Again, I've said this 100 times. I encourage you to go back and watch the differences webinar if you're interested in that. But the main thing for me that needs to be addressed is that every node now I want to say every, and I believe it's every node. Every node has now an exception handling capability. Okay, so before, if you had a node within your process flow, and that node obviously did something, right? So and whatever it did, it returned a value. And if you wanted to test that value for whether or not it errored out, you would have to have a branch there to tell it, okay, if the value was 0, then go this way, and if the value was 1, then go the other way. Or if you were not a very good developer, you probably did not put that there. So now, though, it's a lot nicer because every node now has a tab basically that allows you to handle exceptions within the node. So you can get rid of, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of branch nodes in your complicated flows by just being able to do that. However, migrating them becomes a little bit of an issue because how do you set that tab? Because it doesn't exist in your old version. But luckily, the designer, or the script comes with an option to basically auto set that for now during the migration. And then once they've been migrated, you can go through your flows one by one, look at every node, and then decide whether or not that's something you want to use going forward. You certainly don't absolutely have to, but I 100% recommend using it because it's quite a nice feature. The other really nice thing is that there's lots of debugging functionality, which again, I'm not going to get into. So what's the difference between these XML files that you used to have and the new LPD files? Now, I did tell you that the stuff is stored in the database, and now you're probably wondering, so what do you mean there's an LPD file? Okay, well, that's a very good question if you did ask it, because it is stored in the database. However, if you want to work on it on your desktop, when you tell the designer to download the flow for you, it saves it locally as LPD file, okay? And that's what it works for. So I think that's the landmark process something D. Not sure what the D stands for. So anyway, really all it is the extensions are more or less different. There's some header information in the new one that's different. There's a couple of new nodes, right? There's the landmark node that is very prevalent and very much used within LPD. In fact, if you're running a landmark product, you already know what I mean. You kind of have to use IPA now because it's more or less mandatory. That's where your business rules are now, right? And then there's the addition of the error handling node and the debug provisions that are built in to the LPD, and then again, the information is now stored in the database. But I want to show you guys something real quick, just to kind of show you how similar these are. I'm going to share my desktop, and this is where I usually get in trouble when I try to share a desktop. Okay, that's not it. So let's see. This is our FlowDoc. A lot of you are familiar with this. You've probably seen it at a trade show, or you're using it. This is our tool that helps us document process flows, and it's a subscription tool that a lot of clients use, and it's basically hosted by us. And I just want to show you something. I'm going to load an XML flow from 901 in here, and show you what that looks like. So what the tool does is it graphically represents the flow in a much nicer way, so you can screenshot it for your documentation, and then you can kind of hover over each one of these nodes and see what's inside it. And then if you hover over a branch node, it highlights the branch nodes, and it tells you a lot of that information. It's really easy to kind of be able to see where things are going wrong, or be able to discover what is going on within a flow. Like, for example, this is a query, and I can just kind of look at that query and see, oh, okay, I don't have to like open the browser and whatnot. And another nice thing is I can just send a link of this to somebody who doesn't even have the designer installed, so they can take a look at it, which is very, very great for getting help from people, or at least discussing it with coworkers. But that's not really the point. The point is, if I right-click and say switch view, it gives me a full documentation of the view, right? So now I can copy and paste this into a Word document and submit it to change control, and then I'm good to go. I'd probably save myself 1,000 hours of work right there. And you can document, it's basically fully documented with nice text that you entered as description on your nodes, and it's got the full-on text of everything in there. Now, the reason I show you this is because I want to show you how similar XML is to LPD files. We've been working with this on this product for several years, and like I said, a lot of people are using it, and it's actually quite complicated. So we were really worried when the LPD came out, and then so this is what happened. I just basically go to a new LPD file. And this is a repository of all the LPD stuff I have. And let's just pick one that's interesting. So that sounds like a big one. I don't know why I'm taking a risk on screen, but here we go. So this is a pretty interesting one. As you can see, I don't even have the designer installed on this PC, so if I wanted to look at a flow, I'd be out of luck if I didn't have this tool. So it kind of shows me really nice and graphically what it looks like, and then I can kind of switch view every time I want and see what it is and copy and paste that into a document. But here's what's nice. The reason I bring it up is because, look, it handles LPD files and XML files just the same. They're really the same thing. We just have to put a small provision in to handle for that error handling node. So, you know, when there is error handling, it basically highlights it in here. And this is not one that we fully went through and documented or anything, but, you know, there's still some documentation in here for these nodes. But the point really is, hey, it really helped us kind of see what the differences were between IPA and ProcessFlow as far as the files went. So I'm going to go back to my slide here real quick. Boy, give me a quick second. Okay, cool. We should be back on the slides. So everybody wants to know how long does the upgrade, what is involved. So again, there's the installation and configuration of the landmark and IPA product. Then you got to convert all your flows to IPA, and then testing and go live support, and then unit testing, and you know that's basically kind of part of testing, I guess. So installation of IPA product, I would say plan on about 32 hours there. So that's including kind of configuring landmark runtime and IPA. And then converting flows, it really shouldn't take very long. But then again, it depends on the complexity of the flow and how many flows you have, right? Testing is probably kind of one of the bigger parts, is obviously you want to make sure all these things are tested really, really, really well. So that should answer that last question I just saw pop up. So really, I've seen after those 32 hours, I've seen a client that had only 10 flows, and we were able to get it done in one day. That doesn't include testing that they wanted to do afterwards, obviously. We did some unit testing, some system tests to just make sure things ran and were able to complete. By the way, there's better testing now built into the product too. But after that, we basically just handed it off for some unit and user testing, and then we moved it to production. So really, just a couple of days after the first 32 hours. So a lot of you are obviously already using the FlowDoc product, but for those of you, again, as a small reward for joining our call live, I thought I'd give you a 10-day trial for helping you document all your existing flows. So if you want to do that, you're more than welcome to it. All you got to do is go to flowdoc.nogalis.com/demo, and your username and password are now on the screen. Should be pretty self-explanatory. You just open the file, and then you click submit, and then it shows it to you in graphical view. And then if you right-click and switch view, you can see it in document view. And that's really all there is to it. Then you can copy and paste that into your documentation and make your whoever is asking you for documentation very, very, very happy, because it is exact documentation. It doesn't get any better than that. So that's really, I think, all the information you need to log into it. We'll keep that for you until next Friday. So after next Friday, that username password will no longer be good. So it's just a token of our appreciation for joining our webinars, and hope that it's useful to you. And feel free to share that with your coworkers too. I mean, it is completely open. We don't track any information, so you don't have to sign up or anything. Again, we've given you username and password, so feel free to use it. Upcoming events, before we get to Q&A, and I know there's a lot of questions already, but before we get to Q&A, I just want to tell you about our upcoming events. I'm not going to get into them too as much as last time. August 21st, we have our LBI upgrade. which is very similar to the webinar that you saw today. It's just for upgrading LBI. And then you've got on October 28th, we are still planning to do a Lawson 10X Upgrade Bootcamp, very similar to our first one. And this one's going to be at Health Partners in Minnesota. Again, October 28th, and it's a full day event, basically from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Breakfast starts earlier, and then happy hour goes on after that. You can access all our webinars through nogalis.com/education. And if you're interested in the bootcamp, it's nogalis.com/bootcamp. So real easy. Let's see. Q&A. Okay, I'm going to scroll to the top and then start answering questions. Let's see. And our Info 10 will be, so your Info 10 will be on new hardware. Do we have to wait for that new hardware before we can put in Landmark for IPA? Yes and no. I mean, you're not going to require some really massive hardware just for IPA. So if you have a VM available for a virtual machine available for installing Landmark just for IPA purposes, you might be able to get away with that. Certainly, especially if you're not, I mean, obviously you're going to do this as a test first. That's obviously what we recommend, just bringing up a test server. So that'll kind of help you understand your needs as well. So you don't absolutely need to, but it'd be nice to have nice new hardware. Can you still do an IPA upgrade ahead of time if you're planning on switching from AIX Oracle to Windows SQL? I believe so. That is a very good question. I want to say 100% yes, but let me, that is Rebecca. Okay. I'm going to make sure to answer your question with 100% certainty after I get back and speak with my developer, my installer, I'm sorry, just to kind of make sure there's no catches and gotchas there. But I think that you may be okay doing that. Okay. So process integration and in-for process automation is the same thing. No, I believe, I'm sorry if I led you wrong there, and I kind of was worried that I did. I believe, and I have to review this again, process integration is still a separate license that you may have to purchase, and all that gives you is access to the transformation extender. So if you're using the transformation extender, you may need to buy an additional license. Sorry about that. That may be my bad that I communicated it that way. Are you required to purchase Smart Office to gain access to the in-basket? I can't answer that question. I'm not sure what the licensing requirements are. But the in-basket will be available also in the Rich client, and if you have Landmark installed, I believe that comes with Landmark. So I don't think that is a problem. Can you access the in-basket from Lawson Portal, or does anyone need the Rich client of Smart Office? There is ways that we can make in-basket information show up in any place, so even in mobile and even in within a specific website or portal. I don't think there is a pre-built provision for it, but it's definitely possible. So I believe Chris from Colorado, I think we answered this question. The code inside is still XML. The code inside the LPD files is definitely still XML. There's a little bit more to it, but there's just a couple extras in there, but the code is the same. And then Carl asked the average implementation time, and I think we went over that, 32 hours for installing and configuring. And then let's see, I'd allow, you know how complex your flows are. if you feel like they're going to break, they probably are going to break. But most of the flows we've migrated didn't break; they worked. So that was actually kind of a surprise that the first time, but it isn't anymore. So there is no more. No, there is nothing is run from lid. So is the migration utility run from existing LSF environment using LED or from Landmark server environment? You kind of have, it is not run from lid. I believe you run it from, when that Infor Security Service is installed, those two talk together, and that's where you run it from. Many of our flows, FTP files to and from lots and application Unix server to various Windows files shared to all of those command nodes need replacement. Very good question, Barbara. Actually, better than you might expect news. So if you go back and watch the differences webinar, there is now an FTP node. So you can actually, well, is it a node? It's basically a service you can set up and you can FTP files right from the actual IPA product, which is quite nice, and it actually is pretty powerful. It was surprisingly powerful. So that's there. So I think the answer to your question is you may not have to, depends on how you've set up FTP, but I would really recommend it. Can you customize the in-basket display? Not very easily, but yeah, we have done it. You can customize it, absolutely. Does Infor require a certified installer to do the Landmark runtime setup? I can't really answer that question. I know that they require that a partner installs it or Infor installs it, and I believe that it has to be a certified installer. But again, I'm not familiar with the latest rules that Infor has in place. Can you run IPA at the same time as PFI? I want to install IPA in a sandbox environment to convert and test prior to moving to production. I don't see why not. That's a good question. I don't see why not. They're really, at this point, they're two different products. So they're not going to talk to each other, but I can't imagine that they would do anything to each other. So I think that would be fine. If you're licensed for PFI ProcessFlow integration, which new ProcessFlow product does that equate to? That would be the new process integration. So if you already have the ProcessFlow integration tool, then I believe, again, I'm not a licensing individual, but I believe that goes to the new process integration product, and you get the IPA product. So you kind of get both if you have the integration. And I'm recalling a conversation with Dale Dean. So again, I'm not quoting him, I'm recalling it, so I could be wrong. So Terry asked, regarding security, what if you're not federated in Landmark? Any issues? Any issues if you're an Infor managed service customer without access to the Landmark server, only rich client? No issues on any of those, really. And by the way, thanks for bringing that up. Our managed services customers, I know there's at least 4 of you on this call. For our managed services customers, we handle all of the actual upgrade, and this is for our fully managed services customers. So if you're partial, you know who you are. But there's only 1 of you there. But the 3 managed services customers that are on the phone with us, your upgrade is already part of your managed services contract, and the migration is already part of your services contract. All you have to do is just some of the testing. But Terry, I don't have anything to add to that as far as issues. So is Eclipse still run from client? What version is required for It is, yeah, the Eclipse client, there's no difference there. It's still run. It is a newer client. It looks exactly like the old Eclipse client. You probably at first glance won't be able to tell the difference until you see a couple of the new buttons in there. It is run there, and the version just has to match whatever version of the IPA product you have installed. And they're pretty strict about that. And then Barbara asks, we're going to put Info 10 on new hardware, so do we need to wait for the new hardware to install Landmark IPA? Like I said before, I don't think that's really necessary. I'd at least recommend doing your test box ahead of time, and you can do that on a smaller VM, especially since performance does not really come into play for a test version. You can just kind of run it from really anything that you have available, but you'll have to install the Landmark runtime and then IPA, and then migrate your flows over. With that, we are out of time. If you have any additional questions, please go ahead and send them to me, tan@nogalis.com. Our website has 36 ways of contacting us, so please feel free to use those. This presentation, along with the video and the actual presentation PowerPoint deck, will be available on our website, but I'll send you a link that only you'll get access to, and in 30 days will be available to the public. So the people who attended today will get a link to that. I'm going to now stop recording